welcome to the MacIver Report. I'm Bill Osmolsky, the Content Director for the MacIver Institute. I'm joined by my colleague, as always,
Mike Lucas, Policy Analyst.
And so we, every week, lately it's been every other week, we go through the big stories in Wisconsin that we've covered at the MacIver Institute, things that are on our radar. There's a lot of little things going on that are just kind of flying through the news, the 24-hour news cycle. But we picked out a few big topics we want to talk about today, starting with ROFR, the right of first refusal. We've talked about this an awful lot, but this is a story that just will not go away. And Michael has written a lot about it, and this is part of his latest research. So, Mike, why don't you walk us through this?
Yes. Okay. So at the beginning of the session, we had a standalone right of first refusal bill that was introduced in the Assembly and the Senate, died in committee. What right of first refusal does is it grants a monopoly to Wisconsin's electric transmission companies for the construction of certain competitive transmission projects. So essentially what it does is it takes those projects out of the competitive process. They're no longer subject to competition. They go right into the hands of ATC, which is our big transmission company in the state. Okay, since that failed, the right of first refusal provision has been reintroduced in what's called the Wisconsin Energy Reform Act. In my opinion, a lot of this bill's pretty good. It gives a green light to nuclear energy. It redefines some important Wisconsin statutes that say it shall be the policy of the state that whenever it is technically feasible and cost effective, that renewable energy shall, compose new energy generating, production facilities. It changes renewable energy to low carbon emission energy.
It includes nuclear.
So it includes nuclear. So all the renewable stuff's still in there, but now nuclear is included in that language.
So the lipstick is really attractive, but it's still a pig.
Yeah. So it gives a green light to nuclear energy, which is great in my opinion. It requires that utilities, when they're trying to build a solar or a wind farm or something like that, that they also have to submit a decommissioning plan. So they have to specify the exact way in which they're going to clean up the land after these things have run their useful life.
Yeah, so these are all a lot of issues that conservatives have been complaining about for a long time. In fact, liberals have been complaining about this stuff too.
Yeah.
Because, liberals hate energy projects that, destroy the environment just as much as conservatives do. So, but it seems to me what they're doing is the point. They wouldn't be introducing this stuff if it weren't for the energy monopoly portion.
Yes, and where ROFR comes back is on page 39. So after you get to all the good stuff, you get to the bad stuff.
So we got the bad stuff in there. But we got a bunch of good stuff in there. So every assemblyman who was like, I can't vote for this. Well, we'll clean up these, wind farms that we've decommissioned if you do. So.
Yep, and we have, quite a few senators who have really been pushing for nuclear, and so they're on board with this.
Yeah.
So putting ROFR, in this bill is not sweetening the pot, souring the sweet pot, I guess.
Poison in the milk.
It's the stick being introduced alongside the carrots. So poison is a good way to put it.
All right, so tell us about this chart that we've got up on the screen.
All right, so what we have here, all the big utility companies in the state are called investor-owned utilities, which means that they're publicly traded companies. You can buy stock in these companies on the New York Stock Exchange. Okay, so they are privately owned, but they are publicly managed, or they're state regulated. These utilities have monopolies within their service territories. No one can compete against them. So they have the privilege of monopoly, but at the same time they also have this profit motive operating, right? So it's this unholy matrimony between capitalism, because we have private capital coming in, but we also have public control, right? We have public privilege. So on paper, the people who own those utilities are just and anyone who has a 401k. If you have a 401k or a mutual fund or something like that, chances are you have ownership in some of these utility companies or some utility companies somewhere. But when you really break it down and you look at who are not the majority shareholders, but the plurality shareholders, who has, the biggest say in how these companies are operated and what they're pursuing, it comes down to 3 investment firms: Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. When I went on Vicki McKenna's show, either earlier this week or last week, I can't remember, I said Vanguard manages $10.5 trillion worth of equity, worth of assets. BlackRock is 11.5 trillion, and State Street is about 4.5 trillion. Just those 3 firms together own about 30% of the 4 biggest investor-owned utilities in the state. And the 4 biggest ones are, first, WEC Energy, which is in the southeast part of the state. They're the biggest one. They have the most customers, 1, 2 million, something like that. They have millions of customers. Then there's Madison Gas and Electric. Okay, they have a monopoly on all of Dane County. Okay, so they have hundreds of thousands of people there. Then there's Alliant, and then last there's Xcel, which operates in the northern part of the state. They own Northern States Power. Most of their presence is in Minnesota, so that's why they're in the north. They come over the border. So these 3 firms own 30% of these companies. And to be very, very clear, the firms own these companies. These are not Vanguard or BlackRock mutual funds or index funds. No. It's the people who own Vanguard proper, that owns these utilities.
Yeah.
BlackRock proper that owns these utilities. It's not taking into account what you and I own through Vanguard or through BlackRock. It's what they own. So they have the biggest say in, how these utilities conduct themselves.
Yeah, so I mean, people say, well, what do you care? You're capitalist, free market people. I mean, you just want as much money as possible. No, that's not how this works. This is about delivering value to people. When the government establishes a monopoly, you've destroyed capitalism. You've destroyed free market capitalism.
Yeah.
Because now you have these firms where, and this is how they want it, where ordinarily in business you have to provide value to a customer in order for that customer to freely give you their money.
Yes.
In this situation, you have, when the customer has no other options and it's a product that they have to have, now you've got the company I don't have to give you any value. My motive is to make as much money as possible. I can screw you as hard as I want, and it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, you still have to come to me.
Yep.
So this is where, government stepping in and just like, it's, people call this crony capitalism. Mm-hmm. This is anti-free market, which is why us as a free market think tank have such strong opinions about this.
Yeah, and these companies are very successful, in padding their bottom line. Okay, so since these are the real owners of these utilities, and the utilities are the owners of ATC, it is well within the interest of Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street to push for a right of first refusal. Okay, we don't know what's said behind closed doors, but they sure as hell are talking about it. Yeah. They sure as heck are pushing for it.
And this is part of just, I mean, this is a huge piece of the problem, but we've been talking about this for a long time, just, in terms of energy companies, because they have a government grants monopoly in the first place, that they just are under no pressure to provide quality service. We talked about how they keep shutting down these reliable sources of energy production, the coal-fired power plants, replacing them with windmills, which don't provide as much energy or as reliable energy, but they don't care because the government is guaranteeing them more and more money.
Yeah.
So, when the government just kind of like writes all these new rules of economics, to benefit, niche groups, these are the situations that happen. And this is why Wisconsin has some of the highest electricity prices in the country, and they're going to go up another 12% over the next couple years.
Yeah, and the principal problem here is not the private investment, Okay, capitalism is great. The hallmark, the defining feature of capitalism is that you have a capital market. Okay, which is what the stock exchange represents, right? But also banks and things like that. But Adam Smith and other free market economists talk about this all the time. How you have what is not a good or a bad thing, but you have self-interest, right? People acting in their own benefit, right? To satisfy their own wants and improve their own lives. What Adam Smith lays out is he says, well, if you have the state and you have a monopoly and someone is acting in their self-interest, then you get a bad outcome, right? You turn this neutral thing into something that is actually a positive evil. And he says that's the state. That's statism or socialism or communism. But he says if you have a free market, right, where you have, rules of the game that defend private property rights, that are voluntary, that's free and open, right, that, allows, competition and people to choose, what they buy and what they sell and to whom and where and at what price, then you're actually able to turn this neutral thing, self-interest, into a positive good. And he describes that system as capitalism. Here, you have the first case. You have the former. You have profit motive, self-interest, in combination with the state, which has failed to define the rules of the game that protect and preserve the free market.
And that is their primary role in economics.
And that's their primary role. The state is supposed to establish the rules, okay, in this game. And since they haven't, these companies have benefited tremendously. So at the very bottom almost of this paper, and it's very short, I have a chart that plots the net profit margins of these companies. And if you look at Madison Gas and Electric, Alliant, WEC, and Excel, Madison Gas and Electric, 17% profit rate, almost 18%. Alliant, 18%. WEC, 18%. Excel, 14.5%.
They're doing really well.
They're doing really well. And just for comparison, Walmart, the largest employer, the largest company in the United States in terms of employment, right, employs more people than anyone else, 3% profit margin. And that is their 10-year average. They have never gone above a 4% profit margin. And the reason they can't is because Walmart doesn't have a monopoly. They don't have any privileges handed to them by the state. If you look at, the S&P 500, or you just take the best Vanguard mutual fund, what's your 10-year average rate of return? 7%. These utilities are getting double that. Double. That's only possible when you pervert the law, as Frederick Bastiat would say, and you create a system of plunder where you're able to extort, money, revenue from people who don't have a choice. You have to pay your utility. Even if you don't use electricity, people don't understand, you still have to pay because you're hooked up to the grid. Right? There's a baseline, amount just for the cost of service, even if you don't use a service.
All right, I'm going to use this to pivot to our next story because, what we've got here is essentially the relationship that should be going on is you have the power companies and you got the customers, and they are engaging in exchange between each other, and the government is there to make sure that neither side is screwing over the other side, as everyone's playing by the rules.
Yes.
What we've got going on here is we've got the government and the power companies ganging up against the customers.
Yes.
And so it's a one-sided relationship, and that transitions over into what we have going on in constitutional government here in Wisconsin right now, because this month, the Supreme Court again ruled in Tony Evers' favor, and it was this one was over the line item veto. So over the past few years, Governor Evers has done just an incredible job just chipping away at the legislature's constitutional authorities. And ever since the liberals took over the Supreme Court, they've been helping him do this. Now that April 1st is behind them, they're looking to wrap this thing up. So this whole line item veto thing, this isn't just some technical procedural thing at the Capitol. This is one of a really big piece in Governor Evers being able to consolidate his power and really just render the legislature an irrelevant branch of government, kind of like in the same league as the Wisconsin Secretary of State or Treasurer. They're constitutional offices, but they really don't do anything that can't be done by somebody else. And that is really what Governor Evers is trying to do here. So this line item veto, we've told the story plenty of times, but just real quickly, Governor has a line item veto authority in Wisconsin where if it's an appropriation bill, if it actually spends money, the governor has the right to go in there and cross off words, sentences, sections, cross out entire amounts of money and write in lower amounts. He can't do that for normal bills. Other bills is just up or down, the whole thing stays or goes. For appropriations bills like the budget, he can go in and fine tune it. Years ago, the governor used to have something called the Vanna White or the Frankenstein veto, where you would see in these vetoed budgets, the governor had gone through like whole paragraphs and crossed off like words here or there, cross off individual letters, and would keep one letter per word in order to create entirely new words, sentences, meanings. It was pretty much when you handed the governor the budget, you had no idea what was going to come back. The people of Wisconsin had enough of this. So in 2009, we passed a constitutional amendment that says no more Vanna White veto, no more Frankenstein veto. You can't do this anymore. So Governor Evers figured, well, I think I got a loophole. And so when the legislature gave them the last budget, they had a deal that, all right, Tony, we're going to increase the per pupil revenue limit increase every year by $325. So in your school district, every student there, every year, that school district can raise its revenue per pupil by $325. And if the state doesn't give them enough state aid to cover it, well, then that means that they get to raise property taxes to cover it. And the deal was for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25. Governor Evers did some creative editing, crossed off individual digits, punctuation, and spaces, and he turned that 2-year increase into a 402-year annual increase. Legislature sued, said, you can't do that, that's unconstitutional. Governor Evers said, well, I got a liberal Supreme Court, so let's see. And sure enough, the liberal Supreme Court says, yep, governor can do that, no problem. So now we've got some new rules that nobody really realized before. The governor now can strike out individual digits, symbols, punctuation, spaces to create entirely new numbers. He can essentially change the substance of the bill, and he can increase spending amounts. It's something that no one ever thought that the governor could do. In the past, he's crossed out entire, numbers, and he's written in lower amounts, governors have. And, that was ruled, okay, that's fine. You aren't really changing it, you're just lowering it. Yeah, you can do that. Now, he can increase things now. So I've got to read real quick Justice Hagedorn's dissent, because he actually really came through and wrote a really good summary of what happened here. How does a bill become a law? According to the majority, one option looks like this. The legislature passes a bill in both houses, sends it to the governor. The governor then takes the collection of letters, numbers, punctuation marks he receives from the legislature, crosses out whatever he pleases, and presto! Out comes a new law never considered or passed by the legislature at all. And there you have it, a governor who can propose and enact law all on his own. So this is uncharted constitutional waters. We've got, there's some really deep blue states. And I don't think I've ever heard of I've never heard of a situation before, though, where, so like in California, Illinois, the legislature, them and the governor are pretty much on the same page. There's not really a power struggle there. When you come into a place like Wisconsin, it's a battleground state, and you have an ideologue like Evers, an aggressive ideologue. Don't let his football throwing skills fool you. He throws like a girl, yet he's neutered the legislature. So what we've got here is the governor can now he writes the budget proposal. That budget bill, SB 47, Governor Evers wrote that. It automatically gets introduced in the legislature after he proposes it in his budget address. Now, we know how these court battles are shaping up. Let's say the legislature says, we aren't going to pass a budget this year. Well, you know that the Supreme Court is going to step in and say, no, the Constitution says the Wisconsin, according to, in fact, they even put this in their ruling so that now they can, they can cite themselves if they have to. The Wisconsin Constitution provides that every 2 years the legislature is to pass a biennial budget. So guess what? You guys think you ain't going to write a budget? You think you're just going to play it cute and you're just going to keep the same budget we already have in place? Not going to happen. The Supreme Court's going to step in. They're going to say, you have to pass a budget. You're going to say, no, we don't. They're going to say, yes, you do. And in fact, here's Governor Evers' budget. This is the budget you've passed. So that's the new name of the game. And I don't think a lot of people realize it. Like I bring up the Secretary of State because, it's unthinkable that Wisconsin would not have a legislature. Just like it's unthinkable for the people of Wisconsin to ever eliminate the Treasurer or Secretary of State, even though they don't do anything. What the Secretary of State does? Number one, she's in charge. She holds the state seal. I mean, that could go in the Historical Society or the Attorney General's office. Who cares? Who cares who actually holds the stamp? You're a glorified notary republic. And the other thing she does is when Governor Evers signs a bill into law, she has 2 weeks to publish it. And if she doesn't publish it, it automatically publishes. So the office is meaningless. It's just a title. The legislature is finding itself in the same boat as the Secretary of State and the Treasurer, where you've got a situation where the governor can essentially rewrite, reappropriate, do whatever he wants with that. You've got another case that is going to be the final linchpin in this, and then Evers will have finished this up, and that's where right now the legislature can tell legislature passes laws that are open-ended. Bureaucrats write out the details in the form of rules and regulations. They go back to the legislature and ask, hey, is this what you had in mind? And the legislature says, yep, you're good. And then that goes into effect. Evers is suing the legislature, says you don't have that authority to tell my bureaucrats what they can or can't write, even though rules and regulations are essentially laws. So as soon as the Supreme Court says, yeah, legislature doesn't have a role in this anymore, there's really not a lot of point to the legislature anymore. I'm not saying it's going to go away. You're still going to keep getting elected. You're still going to have those offices. They're still going to have their debates. It'll be one avenue for the governor to advance his agenda. It'll be the fastest way for the governor to advance his agenda because you pass a law, that's real fast. That's real efficient. And if the legislature doesn't want to cooperate, well, his bureaucrats will have to get creative, pull out their ChatGPT and go through the laws and figure out how can they pervert this law into writing whatever regulations they want. So the governor's going to get his way either way. So, unfortunate situation, but that's where we're at. All right, what do we have next?
Something more chipper.
Oh yeah, tax increment financing. So, I need to talk about this a little bit. I see tax increment financing. We've already got people falling asleep at the wheel who are driving to work and listening to this podcast. This is an issue that it's in every single community in the state. Nobody seems to really understand it, and your local officials are all pressuring you that it's a good idea because it's free money. I've read a lot about this. You can see a lot of these reports. You can read all these reports at MacIver.com. But there's a unique situation going on right now in Germantown. I guess it's not that unique. And there's two components to it, and I want to separate the two and just kind of talk about it on just a general education level. They're trying to create a TIF district in Germantown because they want to build a huge housing complex. So those are two separate issues. They're getting kind of combined together at these public hearings and stuff. But
yeah,
let's just talk about the tax increment financing parts. So without getting into all of the all the paperwork and procedures, I just want to talk about what tax increment financing really is. So here we have a road in your city, your town, your village, it doesn't matter. And it's brown. This is what you call a brown field. It's blighted property, it's unutilized property. You're in the city government, you say, you know what, I really would love, we've got that area zoned for retail commercial, we got that area zoned for warehouse industrial. How do we actually get somebody to come in here and put a warehouse, put a shopping center on this piece of property? Well, the very first thing you got to do is designate it as a TIF. If you're using tax increment financing, that is. This is the route you want to go, that's how you do it. You create your TIF. Then you can actually buy the land. That's really important. Any cost that you incur before you actually draw that line on the map and establish your TIF, you cannot use a TIF to pay for that. That's illegal if you try to do it. Germantown is getting themselves in a lot of trouble right now because they bought a bunch of property and they think that they're going to be able to offload that onto the TIF. You can't. You do that, I don't know. I don't know if any community's ever, screwed up that bad before, but the state's not going to let you do it, so good luck. So after you've got the TIF, you take out your bank loan, you can start putting in, you can start improving this land. So storm drains, sewer lines, water lines, electricity, internet. Then you cover it all up. You do your site prep. You got your nice park here. You put in your sidewalk. Now you can go through. Now you can start marketing this property. You can try to get people to. You can start, going to you're going to warehouse companies. Hey, build a lovely. We got the site all prepped for you. Build it right here. We got all your electricity set up. It's level. It's beautiful. You got roads, sidewalks. You name it. Everything is here for you. That is how tax increment financing is supposed to work. And then from the city's perspective, they took out all these loans to pay for all these improvements that I just walked you through. That loan is tied to the TIF district. So now when you get your warehouse company comes in and they build a warehouse, that leads to tax revenue. And the tax revenue the new tax revenue that is generated in the TIF stays in the TIF to pay back the loans, and eventually, all the loans are paid off, and you eliminate the TIF district, and you've got the development that you wanted. Germantown, they're just doing things like out of order, doing really screwy things, which is why this is fascinating to me as somebody that has just really looked over these TIFs for years. So first mistake they made was they bought the property first. You can't do that. Illegal. Nobody's going to jail because government officials don't go to jail when they screw up, but somebody should lose their job.
To be clear, it's illegal because they bought the property before they designated the TIF district, and they're trying to recuperate the costs from buying the property through the TIF financing scheme.
Again, this is not documented. This is based off of lots of conversations, but apparently the idea was if we buy the property first, the community will have to get behind us creating a TIF district.
Otherwise, the money's wasted.
It's worse because so with the TIF district, you can't borrow any more money the city can't borrow any more money because it created a TIF district than it could if it did not create a TIF district. The difference is when you create the TIF district and borrow the money, it gets kind of diffused. It is now tied to the TIF district. The TIF district has taken out a loan. The money that is generated in the TIF district pays back the loan. No TIF district, you've automatically created a debt levy. And people don't realize this, but that debt, you're all paying debt levies. You've got your property tax levy, you got your debt levy, it's combined on your property tax bill, so you can't see the difference. But if your community builds a new city hall or a big public works project and they took out bonds to do it, you're getting hit with those debt service payments right in your property tax bill.
Got it.
So if your city paid millions and millions of dollars to buy a blighted field and there's no TIF district, your property tax bill, you're going to get creamed on your property tax bill because everybody has to pay back that debt service.
Yeah.
If they had created a TIF district first and then bought that same piece of property for that same price, I've been saying for a long time, you can't swing a hammer in a TIF district without raising taxes. So your taxes are going to be going up like this if slowly if you create a TIF district versus immediate impact by buying that property.
Okay.
So bad situation. Now the other thing is that Germantown's doing is really crazy to me is I kind of laid this out. It's you make a very attractive site. Yep. For somebody to come in and build a project that is within you designate by your zoning. We want you to build, this is industrial, this is agricultural, whatever.
Yeah, fill in the blank.
Fill in the blank. Somebody comes, a land developer comes to you, they say, hey, our architect drew up this building, This is what we want. This is our warehouse that we want to build on this property. Germantown did something really weird. They already hired the architect themselves. The city did. So this is their vision of what they want on this property. They've got the plans.
And you know it's going to be the perfect plan, Bill, because this picture is so pretty. It's so pretty.
It is. Look
at all the cars and all the people walking their dogs, sitting on benches. This is reality, Bill.
Yeah, this is very serene. I want this in my community. Of course you do. It looks beautiful. It looks calm. I mean, it's got all those. They know what people want in their communities. It ain't gonna turn out like this. But to me, part of why this is just so crazy is it's like, let's say there's a new subdivision in a town, and you buy a plot and you want to build your house. This is the city saying, "Hey, Bill. Hey, Mike. Why don't you come build a house in our community? And this is the house you're gonna build."
Right.
It's just this is central planning. I guess government is always pushing the envelope on what they're allowed to do, and this is the latest. So.
Yeah.
All right.
So they've, based on the picture, they've designated this for housing?
Yeah, a lot of housing.
Okay.
Mixed, the typical mixed use. It's that new urbanism. The progressives have been talking about this for 25 years. I remember reading about this in Scientific American, before 9/11.
Yeah.
These just perfect communities where you can walk everywhere, and the thing is, first of all, it's just bad policy to use TIF districts for residential. Everyone always knew this. I don't know where this idea, it's over the past few years, like governments have gotten the idea, we should use TIF for residential. Here's the problem with that. People need services. Services cost money. You move to a city because you want those services.
Mm-hmm.
So as your city grows and grows, you're getting your tax base is increasing, so you have more money to provide those services. Now, whereas TIF districts will protect the community from these huge investments, from having to pay them back, from that financial impact. None of that growth in that TIF district is really supporting the rest of the community services. It does grow the general fund in a way, a very convoluted way. We could talk about that another time, but it's not a direct. The property taxes that are paid in the TIF district don't go to the city treasury. And so when you put people on there that are creating all these requirements, all these needs, the city treasury has to provide those services, even though it's not actually getting anything from those people to help support those services.
Yeah.
So that's why it's bad policy. It really strains the city's budget. It puts it in a really difficult spot. I mean, you need cops. I think like the planning factor is like for every 500 people, you're supposed to have one cop.
Yeah.
Those 500,000 people in that TIF district, they aren't paying any taxes to help pay for those cops' salaries. So that's why this is a problem.
Yeah. So it's socialist redistributionism.
Yeah.
Right? Like the people enjoying the benefits aren't also incurring the cost.
Yeah.
The people who aren't enjoying the benefits, everyone else outside the TIF district is incurring the cost.
Exactly. So this gets us into our second quick little instructional here is local government financing. I found that a lot of government officials don't have any idea where their money comes from. In their mind, cities have to grow to get more money, but cities can grow in different ways. So they just think growth, more money. So the primary way that local governments get money from local sources is through property taxes. That is the primary. That is the bulk of your local funding. You've got fees, speeding tickets, things like that. Sure, you've got some small, like a little diversity in your funding, but most of it comes from property taxes. So, the only way to increase your revenue is to build more property. More property, more construction means more money. That is the way it's set up. So it doesn't matter if you have one person live, for these 3 new developments, you're getting the same amount of money. It doesn't matter if you got a crowd of people. You're getting the exact same amount of money. So what am I trying to say here? You know, and now I'm stepping on the central planner role.
Mm-hmm.
If my goal is to increase the city's revenue by as much as possible, I want as many new buildings in town as possible and the most expensive buildings built as possible.
Yes.
And I want as few people living, in those buildings as possible.
Yes.
I want to keep my expenses down. I want to keep my revenue sources up. It makes no difference to me if you've got 100. Generally speaking, if I've got a Chinese city where I've got subdivisions filled with single-family homes and no families. Well, I don't own those buildings, and whoever does has to pay me the taxes, and I don't have to spend any money taking care of the people because there are none. I mean, that's generally how the formula is set up. So I can make a strong case. Mike, you and I have talked about this. There are other options for city revenue that we don't have in Wisconsin. I think there are other options that are probably a good idea that deserve a discussion, like maybe there should be a local sales tax. Maybe we should eliminate the property tax altogether and have a local sales tax or an income tax.
Yeah.
Whatever your revenue source is, you're going to have different incentives to to capture those funds. If it's a sales tax, well, yeah, you're going to want as much retail in your city as possible. You're going to want every circus and carnival and festival that comes from Wisconsin, you're going to want them in your city so that all that money is getting spent in your city. You're getting a cut out of that sales tax. You got an income tax. You're going to want high income earners living in your city. You're going to want to make the safest, most convenient city so that all the commuters from Madison who don't want to live in Madison come to your city. They make all their money, and you get a cut of that.
Yeah.
So like I said, there's different incentives to different types of revenue streams, but none of that matters as long as public officials don't understand how, where their money comes from.
Yeah.
So.
And there's no reason to think that they do because, as a matter of fact, AOC is in the House. And she's the dumbest person, maybe one of the dumbest. It's a tight competition, but one of the dumbest people in Congress.
Yeah, voters do not typically
your local government.
Yeah. A local government where you don't personally really make any money. You might have like $1,000 a year stipend.
Yeah.
So, just, the point of this last presentation wasn't to call anyone out or anything like that, just general education, just so that try to help spread awareness. Like this is how the world works, and this is your incentive to doing various things. So, I know a lot of people move to small communities because they want to live in a small community. They don't want to have a 500-unit apartment building moving into their small city. That's why these are such emotional issues.
Yeah.
And I just want to point out that from a city's perspective, there is really no advantage to having that 500-unit apartment building moving into your city. So. There are a few different explanations and theories that you and I have gone over on why local officials are so committed to doing this. Hopefully I've taken one of those off the table, and one of those theories was, well, they just don't understand how they make money. So.
Yeah.
All right, final story for the day. This is one that I've been tracking for a long time. I thought it was a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
The state of if you make under $48,000 a year, the state of Wisconsin will pay to have you sterilized.
Yes.
Is a horrifying concept.
Yeah. It's sold under the pretense of family planning. Actually, that's the exact term, family planning.
Yep, that's right. So, I mean, you can this goes in so many different directions, but I mean, sterilizing poor people. There's an income limit.
Yes.
You can't be well off and say I want to be I've had enough kids, I want to be sterilized. No, you got to be relatively poor to have this.
And I think this number is a little outdated, but what's the cutoff? Like 45K?
48.
48.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's pretty close to the average income in Wisconsin. So you're really talking about 50% of the working population that is eligible for this.
Yeah, good point.
And it's for men and women, too. I initially thought it was for men, but it's men and women.
Yeah, so, the word eugenics, that comes to mind. Wisconsin banned eugenics in the 1970s, where essentially there's certain types of people that we want more of and certain types we want fewer of. So let's encourage the types we want fewer of to do things like get abortions and sterilizations and things like that. That practice, that social, is that social Darwinism or is it just Darwinism?
I guess it would be social Darwinism.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
yes.
in the one sense of the term, the pejorative sense of social Darwinism.
Yeah. So,
in the non-pejorative sense, it's just Darwinism.
Yeah.
But
and then this started like, this is the fruits of the progressive movement, and Wisconsin is very proud of its progressive movement. So the idea of, well, we want a lot fewer, cognitively disabled people in the world. So let's just start sterilizing them.
Yeah.
That's where all this garbage came from. Obviously, the Third Reich, took it to, new heights. But it continued.
But they got it from Wilson.
Yeah. Yeah, they got it. Yeah, they got the idea
from Wilson.
Yeah, they got the idea from us Americans, sorry to say, and the Americans got it. Those ideas kind of originate here in Wisconsin. So something for us to really be proud of, and we're still promoting it. So even after World War II, even after everyone's decided, eugenics, this is evil, this is wrong, we can't be doing this anymore. It still was going on in Wisconsin until the 70s.
Yeah. Well, I have a thesis. It's interesting to me that they get outlaw eugenics in the 70s. When they legalized zoning in the 60s, which does the same thing in effect.
Yeah.
It's exclusionary. So how do you keep out the undesirables, the low income, the minorities you don't like? Zoning, it's very effective. There's a great book called The Color of Law, which is all about how zoning is a way to keep out the untouchables.
So progressive ideas never go away. Even when society has decided we do not want to do this, they morph. They morph into zoning.
They rebrand.
We rebrand into family planning. So, and this one, I watch old movies. I tell Mike all the time about these old movies I watch, and scenes that I'm surprised aren't popping up more on social media. But this one really brought to mind this scene from the movie Judgment at Nuremberg. And it's one of those movies that everyone should see. It is a class. It's one of those classics that I guess not many people have seen, or at least today. Judgment at Nuremberg. It's 2 or 3 years after World War II has ended. They're trying all the Nazis, and they've gone through all the big guys. So this isn't like the death camp commandants or anything like this. They've gotten down to the justice system. So all the local circuit court Nazi judges are now, on the stand, and one of the main themes here was they were ordering undesirables to be sterilized, and it is an emotional scene, and it's if I can find the clip I'll tack it on, but at the end of this when I edit this podcast, but it really helps you realize just how evil and wrong this is.
Yeah.
And one of this story really, I thought this story was really important to expose because, not only was Wisconsin doing this, but they aren't keeping track of it. They can't give you any numbers or amount of money they spent on this. This story kind of flopped, to be honest with you, and I was surprised at that. But some of the people that read it and commented on it says, "Oh yeah, we should sterilize this group, or we should sterilize prisoners." And it's like, look, you got to reel this back in. No, eugenics is wrong. For sterilization itself is wrong, especially when this is voluntary, this isn't forced, but you're still kind of duping people into it.
Yeah. So
this is not a policy that us as civilized people, as a people that are trying to be moral and ethical, and this is not the direction we want to take our country or our world. So worthy of pointing out, even if nobody read the story anyway.
Yep.
So anyway, that's gonna have to do it for us for today. We're running out of time.
Yeah, you got to go on the radio. So
gotta go on the radio here in about a few minutes. So, hey, keep checking back on MacIver Institute.com. Lots going on. The budget's progressing. That's becoming a really that's getting really interesting. We'll talk about that more next week. Final 2 public hearings are on Monday and Tuesday next week, way up north. We got, I think, one in Hurley or Hayward.
I have no idea.
Even they get confused. They just say Hurley, Hayward, and Hell. Yeah. And then one in Wausau. So after those public hearings, we're going to go right into executive hearings. We're going to start hammering out the budget. deals are happening right now behind closed doors. So we'll keep following that, and we'll keep you informed. So from the MacIver Institute, I'm Bill Osmolsky. I was joined by Michael Lucas. This is the MacIver Report. Thank you very much for listening and or watching, and we will see you soon.